We're on now. All right, good morning. We're starting a new lesson this morning, new study series on Solomon. We're going to try and live stream this so that Tom, who's in Pennsylvania specifically, can keep up with us. And so we say good morning to Tom. Couple of things. If you are watching online and you would like some of the actual physical paper information that we're giving out today and we're dealing with that everybody has in front of them, if you will email me at info@warrentonchristian.org, info, I-N-F-O, @warrentonchristian.org. Email me. I'll get copies of these emailed right back to you. That way you've got a copy of the outline where we're going and what's going on. And so we're going to dive in. Aaron had a early preview this morning of the paperwork, and I gave him his copies, and he just kind of glanced at me. He's like, "Ooh, that's pretty." What was the word you used? Ambitious. Pretty ambitious. That's what he said. That's a pretty ambitious project. So we'll see how today goes, and that'll kind of tell me. So you should have two pieces of paper with you this morning. The first one says Solomon, an Old Testament character study, and this is really kind of like an overview of what this entire study is going to talk about and go over. We're going to talk about Solomon the man. We're going to kind of give you a 10,000-foot view of Solomon's rise and fall. We're going to look at the historical and the cultural background to understand who Solomon was, the cultural condition into which he was born, and to which he ultimately ruled, and then the world at large and how the kingdom of Israel fit into that picture. Okay? So we're going to be way up high seeing the whole thing. That should probably take us, I anticipate, but you never know how that goes. We'll do that 2 weeks. That's this week and next week. And then we're going to go into Solomon the king. We're going to talk about his administration, his trade, his foreign policies with Hiram, the king of Tyre, also known as Phoenicia, and the queen of Sheba. And this is a little more down-to-earth view of what the kingdom that Solomon built looked like and how it affected the world around Israel. Sometimes we don't think about that. What was the effect of this kingdom on the world around them? And so we're going to see that. We're going to see how the close relationships that Solomon developed with the world around him, how it affected his decision, his kingdom, and his eventual, what I'm going to call a downfall, a spiritual downfall more than a physical downfall. Okay? It should take a couple of weeks to go through that information. And then we're going to dive into the biggie, which is really Solomon the builder. We're going to talk about the temple, the building of it, the dedication ceremony, the prayer of dedication. We're going to talk about the palace that he built, the harem that he acquired, the cities that he built, Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. And it's an up-close and personal look at the details of what was going on during this time and what was this all about. It's also going to give us a look into Solomon's heart at the temple dedication, as we spend an entire lesson talking about Solomon's prayer that he prayed on that very special day, that the temple was dedicated, the ark was brought in, and God's presence in a form of a thick cloud filled that place and drove everybody out. And so that should probably take about 4 weeks. And then Solomon the writer is the last one. And I think this hopefully will only take about 3 weeks. We're going to talk about the 3 books that he's credited with, which is Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And that's really his legacy that is left for us. We're going to look at how that shapes and affects our lives as Christians. So that's kind of the ginormous overview of where we're going to go in this Bible study. It's not just a quick little character study. At least I didn't want it to be. Today we talk about a study of the man. This is part 1, and we're going to talk about Solomon's life from an introductory standpoint, clear up until the kingdom is firmly in his hands. I hope that's where we're going to get today. We'll kind of see how this goes. No study of Solomon would be complete unless we start really with like this overview of his life, his accomplishments, his legacy, and his downfall. So today we're going to journey through several books of the Old Testament that give us these multiple references to Solomon's life. And it's going to give us numerous details from several points of view. And we're going to start today in the 2nd book of Samuel. It's where we find the story actually of King David, and it's the family history of Solomon. Now, for time's sake, I'm not going to stop and read every verse of Scripture as we go through. I'm going to kind of sum it up for you If we have discussion points, we certainly can stop and do that. But I gave you on your outlines, I gave you every place that I'm pulling this scripture from. So when I start talking about something, you'll know this is where it is, and this is where Joe found this, okay? So we start with King David's rule, because we need to understand who Solomon's father was and what was going on in the world around him. And in 2 Samuel 5:4, we find out King David was 30 years old when he became king, and that he ruled for 40 years, okay? David had 40 years of warring and conquering. That's what he did for that 40 years. His wars not only happened outside of the kingdom, and I say this kind of tongue-in-cheek, but oftentimes his wars happened right under his nose, right inside of his kingdom. It was wars within his own administration. It was wars within his own family that he either didn't realize was happening, or he just flat out ignored them in several cases, okay? In 2 Samuel 7, we find that God foretells Nathan about the birth of Solomon. God foretold Solomon's birth to Nathan, who in turn reported it directly to King David when he said, I just want you to know, God says, you're not going to be the one to build the temple. Now, interestingly, this is long before his sin with Bathsheba and the killing of Uriah the Hittite. This is long before this. God has already made his mind up that, David, you're not gonna be the one. And you can certainly see that David knew at this point he's never going to be the one to build the temple. I think it's interesting that he didn't accept that, because later on, after the whole sin debacle with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah the Hittite, even after that point in time, he's still shocked when God tells him, it's going to be your son, that does this, okay? David's sin obviously played part in him losing the opportunity to build God's temple. And we need to understand the setting that this takes place in, because we often talk about this. Well, David roaming around on the roof and saw this girl bathing, right? But the setting was this, that it was in the spring, and typically in the spring, the kings go off to war. But David had become so big and important that he didn't go. He stayed home. And basically, he finds himself bored. Okay? Instead of doing what he's supposed to be doing out there with his men, he's at home and he's bored. He wanders out onto the roof, and behold, there's Bathsheba bathing in plain view. David has her brought to him. He sleeps with her. She conceives. And then David finds out that she's the wife of Uriah, which is one of his most trusted leaders. And so then he puts together this plot to have Uriah killed, just to cover up his indiscretion, and so that he'll be free to marry her. And this plot was it was so detailed. It wasn't just, hey, I'm going to have a hitman take him out. We're going to while you guys go to battle, send him out on the front lines. Well, let me back up. This plot was so detailed, he thought, even before that, call Uriah home and have him spend a little time with his wife. That way it looks like it's his kid. Well, that didn't work, because Uriah came home. Nope, I'm not going to go home. I'm in the service of the king. It's time to go to war. He ends up going back. David hatches the plot that says, hey, take him and put him on the front lines, and when the battle gets really heavy, pull all your guys away from him. Leave him there by himself. That's how he kills Uriah the Hittite. Okay? Nathan ends up rebuking David, and he delivers a message from God that the child will die and that the sword will never leave his house. I really think up until that point, David thought that perhaps when all these battles were done, he could settle down. But we see here, God says, nope, that's never going to happen. That's not going to happen. So, the child is born and dies. David grieves. This always is one of those things that gets me. Obviously, Solomon wasn't around to know this, but surely the people from his administration, from David's administration, could have talked to Solomon about this. That, when the child died, David mourned terribly, prayed to God, and after whatever their mourning time is, that says, no, he's dead. He's not coming back. God's not going to raise him. Then David gets up, takes a shower, gets cleaned up, goes about his business, and his people are like, whoa, shouldn't now be the time you're mourning? Not when he says, hey, God's made his decision. It's time to move on. Something that I think sometimes we need to keep in our minds. All right. Bathsheba, David goes to comfort Bathsheba because she's in grief. She conceives a son, and it's Solomon. David names him Solomon, a name which means the peaceful. Now, perhaps David wished for his son's triumphs to be peaceful ones. Perhaps he was reflecting on the peace that he brought to his wife and his family, to have another son to replace the one who had died. I truly believe that David loved Solomon the most since he was the son of his favorite wife. Now, David had a lot of sons prior to this. So Solomon has a lot of stepbrothers prior to this. But God, through Nathan, actually says, Solomon's a good name, but I'm going to call him Jedediah, which means the divine darling. It gives meaning to the divine task that Solomon would end up accomplishing in his lifetime. Now, there's very little that is written about Solomon's childhood. In fact, when I say very little, how about a big goose egg? There's literally nothing. But we can draw some conclusions from the scriptures. First of all, he was born to what we would say, he was born to the purple. Okay? He wanted for nothing. He was born very wealthy. The silver spoon in his mouth is how we probably would say it today. Okay? We know that he had a heathen mother. We know that he was possibly taught. Now, how do we know that? Because Uriah the Hittite married Bathsheba, who was also a Hittite, which means she was a heathen and not a Jew. Okay? He was probably taught or tutored by Nathan the prophet, who spent a lot of time around David and the palace in Jerusalem. He was raised in a polygamist atmosphere. In other words, there was lots of moms, okay, not just one. Solomon was probably, and I love this, Solomon was probably a precocious child. You say, well, what makes you think that? Well, look how he was in his later years. Okay, typically, and this is not always, but a lot of times you can see a lot of the characteristics of your young child in your older child. Agree or disagree? You guys got to think about that one a minute. No comment. Okay. I'll leave that there, Jim. Thanks. He was fortunate to have David as a father figure. I mean, how cool would that be? Oh, my dad's the king. Well, what do you think that's going to let you get away with? Now, when we were raised, hey, my dad's such. Well, that doesn't mean nothing. I'm still going to drag you to him by the ear, and he'll hit you worse than I did, right? That probably doesn't, not hit you. He will discipline you. Thank you. My dad never hit me, so that had nothing to do with you, Dad. However, David set some really bad examples of fatherhood as well as good ones. There was a lot of times where David ignored things that were going on in his family, and he didn't straighten them out. And that came back later on to bite him, right? As we'll see. Okay? Now, I want to talk now. We're going to kind of transition. So Solomon's grown up. That's really all we can say. We have these adversaries that arise as Solomon's getting older. Okay? The first is Adonijah. When David grew old, his son Adonijah, which was his fourth son. It wasn't even his oldest son. It was his fourth son. Adonijah puts himself forward to take over as king. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us maybe the older three brothers were dead by then. We don't really get any background as to why was it just him. Was he the strong-headed one? Was he the what do you call it? A-type personality. Was he the A personality? The Bible doesn't really tell us. But basically, as David's getting older and kind of, stuck in his room, Adonijah just says, I'm going to take over as king. I'm going to be king. The Bible specifically says that David did not interfere or ask Adonijah, why are you behaving like this? So we talked about character traits of David as a father. Here's one of the first ones that you can look at and go, oh man, he blew this. He was the king. He should have put his foot down and said, hey, I make the decisions around here, not you. but he didn't, okay? So the way this happens is Adonijah gets 50 horses and charioteers to run ahead of him in his preparation as crowning as king. And he goes and he gets the support of Joab, who's the captain of the guard. And he was well known as the liberator of Jerusalem. He was one of the first and main generals, if you want to call them, who liberated Jerusalem back as David was taking the land. But he was oftentimes known for taking matters into his own hands. Okay? So Adonijah enlists Joab and says, hey, will you come along with me? Will you do this? And so Joab says yes. And then he says, okay, now I'm of the kingly line, and now I've got part of the military, and now I need to get part of the priesthood. And so he goes and he finds Abiathar, the priest, and he talks Abiathar into joining him. And he invites all of David's sons as well as all of his brothers, except Solomon, and all the royal officials to meet with him at the stone of Zoheleth, if I say that right. Okay? And now Adonijah knew better than to invite Solomon or Nathan, or in fact any of David's special guards to this event, because once he's there and the people are assembled, his plans are already in place. He's going to offer sacrifice. He's going to declare himself king, right? And so this would have been enough for the nation to see this. They see, just think about that for a minute. If we were just all of a sudden, we saw this parade of black limos going by and security vehicles and big SUV vehicles and fire trucks, and that's what that was like with him sending these 50 chariots ahead of him. Okay? Now, while this is going on, God somehow orchestrates Nathan to be able to learn about what it is that Adonijah is doing. And so Nathan goes to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, David's wife, and he pleads for Solomon to be placed on the throne by David. And Nathan tells Bathsheba, hey, I got this plan. Say these exact words to David, and this will get the response that we know we need. Okay? Nathan says, and in fact, as you're doing this, then I'm going to come in and I'll put in a personal appearance to the king in the middle of your plea, and that will seal the deal. Okay? So Bathsheba says, yeah, that's a good plan. She goes to David where she reminds him of his commitment to make Solomon the successor to the throne. So at some point in time, between the time Solomon was born and now Solomon's 18 years old, basically, David had made a commitment to Bathsheba that Solomon was going to be king. And she goes on to tell him of Adonijah's grab for the throne. Hey, this is an unauthorized grab for power. And then all of a sudden Nathan comes in just like he said he would. The prophet, he pleads with David as well to put Solomon on the throne. And so David makes an oath that Solomon will be the next king and he will be crowned that very day. And so he tells Nathan, go get Zadok the priest and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. Let's stop for a minute. Zadok the priest. So now he has the priesthood behind him. Benaiah son of Jehoiada, who is another one of the captains of the guard. Okay, so now he has the military, and he says, go put Solomon on my mule, on the king's mule, and take him to Gihon and anoint him king over Israel. And they're to blow the trumpets and to shout, long live King Solomon. And so they do as they're told, and things get absolutely crazy in the nation. Now here's what you need to know, and that is that the town of Gihon, where they sent Solomon to be anointed, is less than a half of a mile from the stone of Zoheleth. Okay? I'll pronounce it like 3 different times before we're done this morning. It's just one of those things. So they're only about a half a mile apart. Okay? So Adonijah and his supporters move from this stone to a building in En Rogel. And it's, like I said, it's about less than a half a mile from Gihon. And the people hear this shouting. So they're having this big, let's go have a feast, right? They've anointed Adonijah king. Let's go have this feast. And all of a sudden they hear this loud roaring and this shouting. And Jonathan, who's the son of Abiathar, comes in and tells them, hey, David has just crowned Solomon as king. And everybody at the table gets scared to death. It's like, oh man, we are busted doing something we shouldn't have been doing. Okay? his supporters immediately begin leaving. Yeah, God has this amazing sense of humor, and I love it. I'm like, I can see this now. And I just sitting up there, I'm going to be the new king, and he's got all these people around him that he gathered. And then this word comes, and you can see people go, well, I really have something to... what's the scene from Christmas Vacation? He says, you got a little knot in this. Why don't you go ahead and work on this? Oh, gee, I got so much to do. I got homework to do. I got to feed the cows. I need to take care of the pigs. I need to clean my room. I can see people doing that as they're leaving this table with Adonijah. And Adonijah himself gets scared, and he takes hold of the horns of the altar, and he begs for an oath from Solomon to spare his life. And Solomon answers this: as long as you are found to be a worthy man, no harm will come to you. But if evil is found in you, death's going to be your punishment. So Solomon allows Adonijah to leave unharmed. That's literally Solomon's first decision, if you will, right? As king. So Adonijah has left. Nobody's gotten hurt through this process. Solomon has now been anointed as king, and David calls him in and says, I need to give you some final advice. I need to let you know some things before you completely take over the kingdom. His final bit of kingly advice, and his first charge to Solomon is this. He says, and we're in 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 now, if you've been kind of moving through the pages as we go. He says, be strong and show yourself a man. Okay? And this shows us that Solomon was a mere 18 years old when he was anointed and crowned king. And you think about most 18-year-olds. Yeah. So that's kind of a scary picture. But here he is, he's anointed and he's crowned king. Now, although he was advanced in knowledge for his age, the maturity factor was not there. And that's going to be a huge thing in Solomon's life. And I think, I'm going to jump ahead just a minute here, when he asks God for wisdom, that's that maturity factor that I think God gave him. Knowledge beyond his physical years. Okay? So he says, first thing is, here's what I'm telling you as your dad. Be a man. Be strong. Be a man. Then he goes on in verses 3 and 4 and he talks about what God's requirements are. Observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in his ways. Keep his decrees and his commands, his laws and his requirements as written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you go. And he goes on to say, if your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me, God, with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. Okay? Unfortunately, we're going to see later in Solomon's life that this doesn't pan out quite as well as it does at the beginning of his life. Okay? And then David says, I've got some personal things that I need you to take care of for me that I haven't been able to do as king, because it's not very kind of kingly. He says, first of all, 1 Kings 2, verses 5 and 6, do not allow Joab's gray head to go down to the grave in peace. He's an old man, but I don't want him to die in peace. Ooh, a little revenge factor going there, David, right? And why? Well, it was for the shedding of Abner and Amasa blood in peaceful times. And this was during David's reign. They were the commanders of David's army, and Joab overstepped his bounds during David's reign. David didn't say, go kill these two guys, but Joab thought to himself, David's upset with them, I'm going to go take them out. And that's what he did. Okay? And so now David's saying, well, this is kind of your punishment for overstepping your bounds. Yes, you were commander of the armies, but, okay? Secondly, he says in verses 8 and 9, Shimei, who's a man whom David once swore he would not put him to death by the sword. David says to Solomon, I promised him I wouldn't kill him by the sword, but I want you to take care of it for me, okay? Bring his gray head down to the grave in blood for the cursing that he once gave David on the day that he went to Mahanaim. David seriously has a revenge complex going, right? It's like that, they talk about, that unfinished business you have before you finally pass on.
I think if you swear to God that you are not going to, or swear to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword, but you commission your son to do it,
I know,
it's still on your hands.
I know, and yeah. And what's interesting is what we're going to see, and again, jumping ahead a little bit further, what we are going to see happen is that each of these people did it to themselves. Solomon didn't just say, okay, I'm going to go wipe this guy out. There was a circumstance that occurred that required a response from Solomon to say, oh, I told you not to do this, you did it anyway, this is your punishment. So I don't know if that relieves that in God's eyes. That'll be an interesting conversation to have someday. What's the deal here? All right. David gets his revenge complex off of his chest, and he rests with his fathers. And it says he was buried in the city of David. So Solomon is now king. And so there are some things that are going to happen which help, I won't say help, which basically establishes his throne and his kingship, and it solidifies it, okay? In 1 Kings 2, verses 13 through 17, Adonijah, remember his older brother Adonijah, okay? He's still jealous of Solomon. He's still in the scene. Solomon didn't kill him, didn't run him off or nothing. He starts thinking, and he says, I'm going to go to Solomon's mom, and I'm going to talk to her. I'm going to request a favor. And he mentions to Bathsheba, hey, the throne really belonged to me. It was once mine. And interestingly enough, he's smart enough to realize that it was God who intervened and gave the throne to Solomon. But Adonijah goes to Bathsheba and he says, I'm going to ask you to go to Solomon and ask him for a favor. I want you to ask him to give Abishag to me to be my wife. Okay? Now, who was Abishag? We need to understand who she was and what that request was. That wasn't just a, hey, can I have this woman to be my wife who's, she used to take care of the king, but now he's gone. In 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 is where you find the description of this. As David had grown older, he couldn't keep warm anymore, even with covers on him. And so it says, David's servants searched the kingdom for a beautiful young virgin to lie beside David and keep him warm. They found Abishag, who was a Shunammite, and she waited on the king, but had no intimate relationships with him. I'm going to stop there for a second. As I was doing this, I was like, I need to make myself a note and find out what a Shunammite is. And I didn't do that. Is there anybody that recognizes that term and goes, oh yeah, I've studied that and know what that is?
I thought it was just her place of origin, like the Bethlehemite or
or Uriah the Hittite. Yeah, I don't know. I assume that too, but I'm like, well, maybe we'll figure that out at some point. But anyway, so for Adonijah to request the hand of Abishag in marriage, it would have been like asking for the widow of the king. Because
not have relations.
No, but Abishag was treated and accorded all the rights of a wife of the king. She was treated that way by everybody. So from a visual, historical, cultural standpoint, he was basically saying, yeah, I'd like to marry the king's widow. Okay, that's what it was. But obviously it didn't bother Bathsheba because she goes to Solomon's court to speak to him, just like Adonijah has asked. She's smart enough to know, I can't just go in and ask this. So she says, Solomon, I need a favor. What does Solomon say without even thinking? 18-year-old kid. Mom, just tell me, whatever it is, I'll do it. In fact, his words were, I will not refuse it. Right? However, when she makes the request, Solomon flips out. Solomon is outraged and he says, well, why not ask for the whole kingdom for my brother? He is so outraged that he vows to have Adonijah killed that very day, which Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, carries out immediately. So, without digging deeply into the cultural, how do we arrive at that? We know because of her status within the culture that it was unthinkable to do that. Okay. We also know, and I can never remember which one it is. We know that there was one of David's sons that slept with. I should have dug this information all out.
Well, there was Ammon, I don't know if Ammon and Tamar were brother and sister.
Yeah, I think that's the one I'm thinking of.
Different mothers.
Yeah.
David was their father.
Right. Right, and you didn't mess with the royal family and any parts of the royal family, and so basically that's what Adonijah was being accused. That's what he was killed for. You're messing with the royal family. You don't mess with the royal family. Okay. So we have this happening, and Adonijah gets killed, and so while he's dealing out justice, he decides, you know what? I need to deal with Abiathar the priest, because you remember Adonijah asked Joab, the commander of the armies, to come with him, and Abiathar the priest to be to come with him also. And so he says to Abiathar, "Go back to your fields. You deserve to die, but I will not put you to death now, because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David, and you shared all of my father's hardships." So Solomon basically says, I know your first love is to be a priest and to serve in the temple, but you're not going to be allowed to do that anymore. You're going to go live on a farm, and that is going to be your punishment. Okay? Now, while this is going on, now Adonijah gets killed, this guy gets banned to his farm, and Joab hears about Adonijah and Abiathar, and he thinks, oh man, the stuff is coming down the pike now. I'm next in the line, right? He fears the justice of Solomon, so he goes and he hides in the tent of meeting. Okay? Now remember, for them at that time, that was the temple. It wasn't just, oh, this is where we gather. It literally was the temple, because the temple hadn't been built yet. He goes in there, and he goes into not the outer court, he goes to the inner court, the middle part, right? And grabs a hold of the horns of the altar of sacrifice. Okay? And when Solomon hears what Joab's done, I mean, you can hear the gossip going up and down the city of Jerusalem right now and through the kingdom. When Solomon hears what Joab's done, he orders Benaiah to go strike him down on the very spot that he stood holding onto the horns of the altar. So Solomon has this guy killed in the temple. Right? Well, the story goes, it's not finished yet. The story goes on from there. And if you remember, the last of David's charge to Solomon was to fulfill his deal with Shimei. And so Solomon called, you know what, while I'm dealing out justice, let's just get it all done now, right? He calls Shimei in, and he says, I want you to go build a house here in the city of Jerusalem. And you are never to leave that house or to cross the Kidron Valley. Okay? Shimei says, I can do that. I can do that. And he lives in Jerusalem a long time. Now I'm going to jump ahead in the story. There's things I'm leaving out, but I want to finish this about Shimei. About 3 years later, 2 of Shimei's slaves run away from him. And they run to the land of Achish. And in Achish, to the land of Gath, and they go see Achish, who is the king. Shimei saddles his donkey. 3 years, I forgot that I'm going to die if I go do this, right? Saddles his donkey, and he goes out to retrieve his slaves. So the slaves must have been pretty important, or he didn't think Solomon would do it, or he was just lulled into this. I don't know. But when Solomon hears that Shimei has left Jerusalem and he crosses the Kidron Valley, what does he do? He sends his guys out for him. They pick up Shimei, they bring him back, and he says, did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you, on the day you leave to go anywhere else, you will surely die? And did you not answer, what you say is good, and I will obey? And then Solomon takes time to remind him of all the wrong that he did against David, and now is the time to avenge his father. And so he gives orders for Benaiah to strike down Shimei. And so literally at this point in time, the kingdom is put in Solomon's hands. firmly. He has nothing left to deal with from David's reign. Any of the problem people from David's reign are now dealt with and out of the picture. It is Solomon who is in charge. He's now roughly about 21 years old, and the kingdom is his. Okay? Look at that, Aaron. I made it to my last point. All right, I'm going to stop there and ask up for questions, discussions.
I do have one question. You
Sure.
said at the very beginning that God prohibited David from building the temple because before his sin with Bathsheba.
Mhm.
Did he say that it was because of that, or was there any other reason given, or was it just?
When God says that, and let me find that for you. That's 2 Samuel 7, 12 and through 13. Man, you talk about trying to figure something out. I left my phone at home this morning. So I'm, what did you say, Aaron? I'm going back to, and I'm not digital, I'm analog. I'm using the analog version. And man, and I don't even have my own Bible with me, so that even feels funny. 2 Samuel 7, 12 and 13. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father. He will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. That's where he says basically Solomon's going to be the one. A descendant is going to be the one that's going to do this. And then when he specifically says, "Hey," let me find the exact passage again. It's up in verse 8, 9, 10.
Just start with verse 4.
Is it 4? Is it that far up?
It's a good.
But that night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelled in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I've been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Wherever I have moved with all the other Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why have you not built me a house of cedar? Now then, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, and appointed you ruler of my people. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and I have cut off all your enemies before you. Now I will make your name great, like the names of the greatest men on earth. And I will provide a place for my people Israel, and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore as they did at the beginning and have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also give you rest from your enemies."
There's some place that it says David has too much blood on his hands.
Right, right, and I obviously missed that.
It was in that.
I did too. That's why I went right there.
I guess I've just heard the Bathsheba thing is why God
And it's really not. That's when God cemented it. But it's actually before that. He decided before that because you can't build a house because of the sword in your household. And I cannot. Too much blood on his hands. Yeah, I can't. I read that, and I'm not sure where. I didn't write that down, so I apologize for that.
she was not the reason that he didn't go to
No,
the temple. He had
no.
prior convictions.
Prior problems, and it just shows because of that. Then you turn around and you kill Uriah in cold blood, dude. Look, this is why, you know. Yeah, that's a great point, Aaron.
So why do you think that God came down on, I can't remember the name, the one just touched the ark, and he didn't come down on David for murder?
Okay, the question is, why did God come down so hard on the priest that grabbed the ark to keep it from falling as it was being brought in? And he didn't come down on Solomon for killing somebody right there at the altar. So, first of all, where Solomon killed Adonijah was at the altar of sacrifice. It wasn't at the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so that would have been in the next little room in. But the ark was special. God made it very clear. Nobody touches this except with these two poles, right? And if it's going to be carried by other than man, it's put on a cart. It was very specific about how that had to be done. I don't know why, other than that what Adonijah did was worthy of that. You did not, unless you were a priest, you didn't go into that area. So he was not a priest, so he was already in trouble for that. But yes, God came down. You think about that, and we would all go, well, I'd probably smack him around a little bit, but I don't know that I'd kill him for that. But that's what God did, for sure.
It wasn't like they didn't know that how specific way they were supposed to do it. They weren't doing it the way they were supposed to be doing it. They knew it was wrong.
Correct. They were well aware of what the regulations were when you transport this and what you do and how it's to be treated.
Shortcut and that don't work.
Well, and it also makes me wonder, I mean, that guy was obviously close enough. Were you not even supposed to be that close? So that's possible. You looked that scripture up?
I looked it up real quick, and it, 1 Chronicles 22:8, 1 Chronicles 28:3 talks about he would not be able to build the house of God because he was a man of war or a man of blood.
1 Chronicles 22:8.
Yeah, and also 28:3.
Also 28:3 talks about why David couldn't build the house, couldn't build the temple for God, because of being a man of war, the sword, all the bloodshed that was on his hands. Great.
But this is the word of the Lord came to me. You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You are not to build a house for my name, because you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight.
Yes. Is that 1 Chronicles 22:8? Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? All right, so next week we're gonna stick with the 10,000-foot view, and next week we're going to look at the remainder of Solomon's life and kind of walk through that, and then we'll start diving in really deep into this. All right.
God
Okay.
actually named Solomon right there in that same area.
As the builder, yes, yeah, in 1 Chronicles 22:8-ish, somewhere in that, yeah. 9, okay. All right. Donuts and coffee are ready. You guys are dismissed.